Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel deep into the frozen heart of Canada's forgotten small towns, places hidden among endless wilderness, isolated roads, and communities where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing, real small-town horror stories ever recorded. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are real, documented encounters shared by ordinary people who lived through moments that still haunt them. From abandoned farmhouses to creatures that should not exist. From basements hiding secrets to disappearances that defy explanation. Tonight, you will hear horrors that never truly ended. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Canada, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Evan Miller, and this happened when I was 32 years old, living in a small Canadian town called Coldwater Ridge, a place so remote it barely showed up on most maps. I moved there after my divorce, hoping the quiet would help me reset my life. I took a job as a night maintenance supervisor at the local grain depot. Steady pay, long hours, and almost no people. Exactly what I wanted. Coldwater Ridge sits between thick pine forests and an old highway no one uses anymore. In winter, the snow doesn't fall, it swallows. Houses disappear behind white walls, and silence presses so hard it feels physical. The locals were polite but distant, the kind of people who answered questions without ever explaining anything. On my first week, an older co-worker named Graham warned me about one thing. "Never follow sounds in the snow," he said, dead serious. I laughed it off. Snow plays tricks on acoustics. Everyone knows that. But on my 6th night shift, while locking up the depot at 2:17 a.m., I heard a soft whistling coming from the tree line. It sounded close, and it sounded like it knew my name. At first, I convinced myself it was the wind. Coldwater Ridge was famous for strange weather patterns, and snow could bend sound in unnatural ways. Still, the whistling didn't fade like wind usually does. It followed a rhythm, 3 short notes, then a pause, then 2 longer ones. Almost intentional. I stood there with my keys frozen in my hand, breath fogging the air, listening. The sound drifted through the trees, never getting louder, never getting farther away. That's when I noticed something else. There were no animal sounds at all. No birds, no wind through branches. Just that whistling, cutting cleanly through the silence. The next morning, I asked Graham about it. His face tightened the moment I mentioned the sound. "Did it whistle back when you stopped moving?" he asked. I told him no. I hadn't moved at all. "That's good," he muttered, refusing to meet my eyes. "Means it was just checking." Over the next few nights, the whistling returned. Always after 2 a.m., always from the tree line. Once I swear it sounded closer, right behind the chain-link fence. And once, it whistled the exact tune my father used to call me home as a kid. That's when I realized this thing wasn't random. It was learning me. By the 4th night, sleep became impossible. Every time the wind brushed against my window, my body reacted like it was the whistle returning. I started leaving the radio on at night, low volume, just to remind myself that normal sound still existed. But even then, there were moments when the static seemed to bend into something almost musical. At work, I noticed changes in the town itself. People avoided being outside after dark. The diner closed earlier than the posted hours. Porch lights flicked off the moment the sun dipped behind the trees. When I asked why, no one gave a straight answer. They just said winter was hard on people. One night, curiosity won. I stepped closer to the fence instead of backing away. The whistling stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt wrong, like a held breath. Then, from deeper in the forest, I heard footsteps crunching slowly through the snow, deliberate, measured, pacing me. I took a step back. The footsteps matched it. That was when I saw the indentations forming in the snow between the trees. Not animal tracks. Too evenly spaced, too upright. Whatever was out there didn't rush me. It was waiting for me to make a mistake. The next morning, Coldwater Ridge woke up to flashing red lights and rumors. A teenager named Lucas Brent hadn't come home. His truck was found abandoned near the old service road that cut through the forest. Engine still cold, driver's door wide open. No footprints leading away. Just snow, smooth and untouched. At the depot, Graham didn't say a word. He just handed me a thermos and told me to keep it close. "Sound carries farther when it's hungry," he said quietly. That night, the whistling came earlier than usual, 1:34 a.m. It wasn't coming from the trees anymore. It came from behind the depot, closer than it had ever been. I shut off my flashlight, heart pounding, and listened. The whistle changed this time. It was wrong. Too many notes. Slightly off-key, like someone trying to remember a melody they'd never fully learned. Then it spoke. Not clearly, not loudly, just enough to sound human. "Evan," it whispered, stretching my name like it was tasting it. I ran inside and locked the door, pressing my back against the cold steel. Outside, something scraped slowly along the wall, circling, patient. I stayed inside the depot until sunrise, sitting on the floor with my back against the door, gripping a wrench like it could save me. The scraping stopped sometime after 3 a.m., but the silence that followed was worse. No footsteps leaving, no whistle fading away, just nothing. As if whatever had been outside simply decided to wait somewhere I couldn't see. When morning came, the snow around the building was untouched. No tracks, no marks. Except for one thing, right beneath the office window, carved cleanly into the snow, was a perfect circle. Not a footprint, not dragged, just pressed straight down, deep and round, like something heavy had stood there without moving. I took the day off and drove straight to Graham's house. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He let me in without a word and poured 2 coffees with shaking hands. On his wall hung old newspaper clippings. Missing people, spanning decades. Same winter months, same stretch of forest. "That thing doesn't hunt bodies," Graham finally said. "It hunts voices, memories, familiar sounds." He told me the whistling wasn't calling people out. It was practicing them. And once it got the tune right, people followed it willingly. That night, I made a decision that still haunts me. I brought a recorder to work. If the thing was learning voices, I wanted proof. Something real enough to remind myself I wasn't losing my mind. I set the recorder on the loading dock and waited inside, watching through the frosted glass. At 2:02 a.m., the whistling began, softer than before, closer. Then it changed. The recorder picked up a voice, my mother's voice, calm and warm, calling my childhood nickname. She'd been dead for 7 years. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears. But the sound came through the walls, through my head. Every instinct told me to open the door, to go to her, to stop being alone. That's when I noticed something terrifying. The voice wasn't coming from one direction. It echoed from everywhere at once, bouncing off snow, metal, trees, like the town itself was speaking. The door handle rattled gently once, as if tested by careful hands. I shut off the recorder, and the voice cut mid-word. Outside, the whistle returned. Angry now. Distorted. I realized then what Lucas had done. He hadn't been chased. He had followed. By the seventh night, the town felt hollow. Lucas's name was no longer spoken out loud, like saying it might invite something else to listen. Snowplows stopped clearing the old service road entirely. Even the radio station went silent after midnight, switching to dead air instead of music. Graham called me just before my shift. "It's getting bold," he said. "That means it's almost ready." I asked him ready for what. He didn't answer. He just told me to leave town before the next full snowfall. But I couldn't. Something about the whistle had gotten under my skin, like a hook I couldn't shake loose. I needed to see it, to understand it. That night, I didn't wait inside. I stepped beyond the fence and into the snow, heart hammering. The whistle started immediately, circling me. I followed it down the service road, each step heavier than the last. That's when I saw the shapes hanging from the trees. Not bodies, echoes. Frozen impressions in the snow shaped like people mid-step, mid-turn, mid-reach. Faces smoothed away, mouths slightly open, as if still listening. The whistle stopped behind me. I felt breath on my neck, and something leaned close, trying my voice on for size. I don't remember running back to the depot. I only remember the pain in my lungs and the way the whistle shattered into broken notes behind me, furious and hungry. I slammed the door shut just as something hit it hard enough to rattle the hinges. Inside, the lights flickered. Over the intercom system, a voice crackled to life. "Evan," it said softly. My voice. Perfectly mine. It began telling my memories out loud, things I'd never shared. My divorce. The night I slept in my car because I couldn't go home. The fear of dying unnoticed. Each word stripped something away from me, like it was rehearsing who I was. I realized then how it finished people. It didn't take them whole. It replaced them. I ripped out the power to the building. Darkness swallowed everything. The voice screamed, no longer human, no longer controlled. Outside, the whistle broke into a shrill, wounded sound that shook the walls. When the silence returned, it felt thinner somehow, weaker. I stayed until morning, shaking. The snow outside was untouched again, except for one set of footprints. Mine, leading into the forest. By sunrise, the footprints were gone. Snow had erased them like they never existed, but I remembered every step. I quit my job that morning, packed what I could fit into my car, and left Coldwater Ridge without telling anyone where I was going. Graham didn't try to stop me. He only nodded, like he'd already said goodbye. I drove south for hours, refusing to turn on the radio. Every sound inside the car felt suspect. Wind through the vents, tires on slush, my own breathing. When I finally stopped at a roadside motel, I locked myself inside and slept with the lights on. Weeks passed, then months. I moved again, this time to a crowded city where silence never fully exists. I told myself noise would protect me, that whatever lived in the snow needed quiet to hunt. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear it, a faint whistle beneath the traffic. It wasn't close, not yet, but it was patient. I began noticing gaps in my memory, small things at first. Songs I couldn't quite finish, names that slipped away. That's when I found something terrifying in my phone recordings. A file I didn't remember making, labeled Practice. I played the file once. I wish I hadn't. It was me, my voice, calm and steady, whistling that same broken melody. In the background, faint but unmistakable, was the sound of wind moving through pine trees. I paused the recording and checked my window. No snow, no forest, just city lights. The file ended with a whisper. So quiet, I had to turn the volume up. Almost perfect, it said. That was 3 years ago. I don't whistle anymore. I don't hum. I avoid mirrors when I'm tired, because sometimes my reflection moves a fraction too late. People tell me I repeat stories, that my laugh sounds forced, practiced. Last week, a co-worker asked where I learned that tune I was tapping on my desk. I didn't remember tapping anything. If you ever hear someone whistling in the snow, don't answer. Don't follow. And if the sound feels familiar, if it sounds like someone you love, run. Because once it learns you well enough, it doesn't need the cold anymore. My name is Caleb Turner, and this happened when I was 26, after I moved to a quiet Canadian town called Hollow Creek. I took a temporary teaching job there, thinking it would be a calm place to save money and plan my next step. Hollow Creek sat surrounded by frozen farmland and dark forest, with one main road, a gas station, and a church that towered over everything else. The church was old, older than the town itself, and no one seemed to attend it anymore. Yet the bells still rang every night at exactly 12:17 a.m. Not once, not twice. 13 slow, heavy tolls. I asked the principal about it during my first week. She smiled politely and said, "That bell doesn't work." Then she changed the subject. Locals avoided talking about the church. Kids crossed the street to avoid walking near it. Even during the day, the place felt wrong. Windows dark, doors sealed, the air around it colder than the rest of town. On my third night, lying awake in my rented house, I heard the bell ring for the first time. Each toll vibrated through my chest, not loud, but deep. After the 13th ring, something else followed. Footsteps. Right outside my bedroom window, I froze in bed, staring at the dark outline of my window. The footsteps didn't rush or stumble. They moved slowly, deliberately, crunching against the thin layer of frost beneath the snow. Whoever, or whatever, was out there paced the length of the house, stopping directly beneath the window. I held my breath. The bell rang once more. That wasn't possible. It had never rung 14 times. The footsteps stopped. I heard breathing now, raspy and uneven, so close it felt like it brushed the glass. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, but before I could, a voice whispered my name. Not shouted, not called, whispered. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, there were no footprints outside, no marks. Just frost-covered ground and the faint smell of damp earth. At school, I asked one of my students, a quiet boy named Elliot, if he lived near the church. His face drained of color. "My dad says the bell rings for people who don't belong," he said, "and when it rings extra, it means someone's already been counted." That night, the bell rang early, and it rang 14 times. The next morning, the town felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just tense, like everyone was bracing for something they didn't want to name. At school, one desk in the back row sat empty. Elliot wasn't there. When I asked the principal about his absence, she paused too long before saying he'd transferred overnight. No paperwork, no goodbye. That afternoon, I walked past the church for the first time. Up close, the building looked wrong. Stones warped and darkened, like they had absorbed something over the years. The bell tower loomed overhead, but the rope inside hung limp and severed, frayed at the end, as if cut long ago. A man across the street watched me from his porch. He shook his head slowly. "You shouldn't stand there," he said. "It notices." I asked him who rang the bell. His jaw tightened. "No one rings it," he replied. "It rings when it's time." That night, I didn't wait in bed. I sat by the window, lights off, watching the street. At 12:17 a.m., the bell rang again, 13 times. Then I saw movement near the church. Something tall stepped out from the shadows, pausing as if listening. And when the 14th bell rang, it turned its head directly toward my house. The figure crossed the road without making a sound. No crunch of snow, no footsteps. Just smooth, unnatural movement, like it was gliding rather than walking. I couldn't make out its face, only the outline of a long coat and shoulders too narrow to be human. It stopped at the edge of my yard. I dropped to the floor, heart hammering, but curiosity dragged me back up. When I peeked over the windowsill, the figure was gone. In its place stood something far worse. Elliot, or something wearing him. His eyes were open too wide, whites showing all around. His mouth moved slowly, like he was struggling to remember how words worked. "You didn't answer," he said in a voice that cracked between child and something older. So, I came closer. The bell rang once more. 15. Elliot's head snapped toward the church, his body stiffening like it was pulled by a string. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I vomited in the sink and stayed awake until dawn. By morning, Hollow Creek had put up missing person posters for Elliot, as if he'd vanished that night. But I knew the truth. He hadn't disappeared. He had been answered. After that night, I started keeping a journal. Not out of habit, but out of fear that my memory would be rewritten the way Elliot's had been. I wrote down the time the bell rang, how many times it rang, and what I felt afterward. Patterns began to form. Every extra toll followed someone new arriving in town. A nurse, a truck driver, a woman renting the old blue house near the creek. They never left. Instead, they changed. At school, the nurse's daughter stopped speaking altogether. She stared at the church during recess, lips moving silently, like she was counting. The truck driver showed up at the gas station every night at 12:30, standing under the broken light, waiting for something that never arrived. The woman by the creek began attending the church alone, sitting on the steps for hours, even though the doors never opened. I confronted the principal again. This time, she didn't deny it. "The bell counts the town," she said softly. "When it rings extra, it's correcting a mistake." I asked what kind of mistake. She looked at me with tired eyes. People who weren't meant to hear it. That night, the bell rang 16 times. And for the first time, I felt it counting me. I decided to go into the church. Not because I was brave, but because the ringing had started to feel like pressure inside my skull. Like something tightening every night, waiting for me to break. I went just before midnight, when the town was asleep and the air felt heavy enough to choke on. The front doors were unlocked. Inside, the church smelled of damp stone and old earth. Pews were covered in dust, untouched for years. The bell rope lay coiled on the floor, cut clean through. I followed the stairs up the bell tower, each step creaking like a warning. At 12:17 a.m., the bell rang. Not above me. Behind me. The sound came from the walls themselves, vibrating through bone and teeth. I covered my ears, screaming, but my voice vanished into the noise. With each toll, names filled my head. People I'd met, people I hadn't, people I shouldn't know. When the ringing stopped, I was alone again. On the wall, Carved deep into the stone were rows of tallies, hundreds of them, some scratched out, some circled. At the very bottom, a fresh mark appeared. One line, still wet. I didn't remember leaving the church, but I woke up in my bed just before sunrise with my shoes still on and my journal open on my chest. A new entry had been written in my handwriting. I hadn't written it. "You were heard." The words were pressed so hard into the paper that they tore through the next 2 pages. My head throbbed, and with it came a strange certainty. Something inside the town had adjusted, corrected. When I stepped outside, Hollow Creek looked the same, but it felt lighter, like pressure had been released. At school, the empty desk in the back row was gone. Not moved, gone entirely. No mark on the floor where it had been. When I asked about Elliot, the kids stared at me like I'd made up a name. There was one exception. A girl raised her hand slowly and asked, "Why do you keep calling him that?" "Calling who what?" She pointed to the window, to the church. "That's where he lives now," she said. "He helps ring." That night, the bell rang 13 times, then 14, then 15. Each toll sounded closer than the last. Tried to leave Hollow Creek the next morning. My car wouldn't start, neither would the bus. The highway signs pointed the wrong way, leading back into town no matter which road I took. By dusk, I understood the truth the locals had lived with for generations. The church didn't trap bodies, it trapped rolls. Someone had to hear the bell. Someone had to be corrected. Someone had to help count. At 12:16 a.m., I stood outside the church, shaking as the doors opened on their own. Inside, the air pulsed with soundless ringing. Figures stood along the walls, some adult, some small, faces smooth and patient, waiting. The bell rang once. I felt something lift out of me. Not my body, my resistance. I don't know how long I stood there. When the ringing stopped, I was alone in the street again. The church doors were closed, silent. I still live in Hollow Creek. The bell doesn't ring every night anymore. Only when someone new arrives. And when it does, I make sure they hear it. The next few months, I began to understand the rhythm. The bell never missed its schedule. New people arrived in Hollow Creek, and the bell rang extra for each of them. Sometimes, it felt like I was the only one aware of its timing. Other times, it whispered through the wind, brushing my skin like a warning. One night, I heard a voice call my name from the church. Not Elliot's, not my own. Someone else, terribly familiar. My stomach knotted as I approached the doors. Inside, the pews were empty, but the bell rope moved by itself, rising and falling in perfect cadence with my heartbeat. The tallies on the wall had multiplied, hundreds more lines organized in groups. One group circled in red chalk that hadn't been there before. I realized something horrifying. Someone had been added since I last looked. I felt a tug at my sleeve. I turned. No one. Then the bell tolled once. A sound like 1,000 whispers pressed into one note. My vision blurred. I was dizzy. My body felt light. My ears rang. And then I heard the final toll. My own name whispered along with it. It was counting me. I don't remember leaving the church that night. When I woke, it was dawn, and my journal lay open on the desk. Another line had been added, freshly etched, like ink soaked into paper. Counted. My head pounded. My hands shook. I glanced out the window. The church stood silent, empty, yet somehow alive. From that day on, I made a choice. To stay, to answer, to keep the rhythm intact. Every night when the bell rang 13 times, I listen. 14. I step outside. 15. I walk toward it. I count. I guide. New arrivals sometimes look at me strangely, like I'm part of the town's machinery. And I am. The bell doesn't just ring. It observes. It selects. It shapes. I've learned the hard way. Ignoring it doesn't save you. Following it doesn't save you. The bell decides who is heard and who is lost. Hollow Creek is quiet now. Too quiet. But I know it's only waiting for the next visitor, the next mistake, the next voice. And when it calls, I'll be standing there, ready to answer, as always. My name is Daniel Frost, and this happened when I was 28, stationed as a temporary lighthouse keeper in East Point, Nova Scotia. The lighthouse sat at the edge of the cliff, overlooking endless jagged waves that roared day and night. The town was small, just a few fishing families, but the lighthouse had always been notorious. Locals claimed strange things happened there, but I chalked it up to superstitions. The first week was uneventful, almost peaceful. The fog rolled in thick, covering the coastline, and the light cut through it like a lonely eye. At night, I would patrol the spiral stairs, recording routine logs, noting weather, ship activity, and tidal shifts. Then came the scratching. At first, I thought it was rats in the walls, but the sound was deliberate, rhythmic, like claws tracing the stone. It circled the spiral stairwell, always staying one floor below or above me. One night, I checked the windows. Nothing. No rats, no branches. Only the lighthouse standing tall against the black Atlantic, waves crashing like drums below. Then I heard it, a low, guttural whisper behind me. "Daniel." I froze. My name. In a voice that was neither male nor female, human nor fully natural. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, bouncing off the metal stairwell. But the sound repeated. Scrape, 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 following the spiral precisely. I called out, my voice echoing against the walls. Nothing answered except my own heartbeat. Then the whispers returned. "Daniel, watch," it said this time. The words weren't formed correctly, like it was learning speech, grasping for meaning. My hands shook as I gripped the railing, eyes darting to every shadow. I checked the logbook that night, and something had been added. A note in my handwriting, though I hadn't touched the book. "Do not look into the fog." The air grew colder, pressing against my skin. I glanced at the windows. Through the dense fog, I thought I saw a shape. Tall, thin, human-shaped, but wrong. It floated above the waves, moving with the water instead of against it. A sudden gust slammed the door shut behind me. The whispering grew louder, almost a chant now. "Watch, follow, follow." I realized then that the lighthouse didn't just warn ships. It watched its keeper. And I was being tested. That night, sleep was impossible. I stayed awake in the observation room, eyes glued to the revolving light. Every turn of the lamp made shadows twist across the fog, but the shape didn't move with them. It stayed just beyond the reach of the beam, floating, patient. I tried radioing the town. Static. Nothing. Even the emergency frequency was dead. It felt like the lighthouse itself had swallowed all connections to the world. I paced the stairs, each creak underfoot echoing through the tower, until I noticed something even more unnerving. Footprints. Not my own. Large, uneven, and wet with ocean spray. They started at the base of the spiral stairs and led upward, but stopped abruptly on the 5th floor. The last print seemed pressed into the wood like a hand pressing a palm, though I hadn't seen anyone. I wanted to leave, to run down the cliff path to town, but something held me. The whispering returned, insistent. "Watch. Keep. Safe." I followed the sound back to the light room. The fog outside shimmered unnaturally, like a curtain being pulled. Shapes moved within it, dozens of them, rising from the waves, circling the cliff, their forms indistinct, but their intent clear. The lighthouse wasn't just a warning for sailors. It was a beacon for something waiting in the deep. The fog grew thicker that evening, suffocating and unnatural. I felt it pressing against my chest, whispering in voices not my own. The shapes outside moved closer, their forms clearer now. Tall, skeletal figures with glimmering, featureless faces, hovering just above the waves. I tried to lock the windows, barricade the doors, but each effort was futile. The whispers became words, chanting in rhythm with the revolving lamp. I realized with a jolt. The lighthouse didn't rotate to warn ships. It rotated to watch them and me. I descended the stairs slowly, trying to maintain control, but the floorboards groaned with footsteps that weren't mine. At the 5th floor landing, the wet prints began moving again, slowly sliding across the steps as if guided by an unseen hand. I froze, heart hammering, when the scraping stopped directly behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. Instead, I listened. A low, guttural voice breathed in my ear, almost gentle, almost coaxing. "Daniel, you are the watch. You belong to the light." I understood then. The lighthouse had chosen me. The fog, the whispers, the shapes. They were all part of the trial. And if I failed, I would become part of it. I stayed awake all night after that, watching the fog roll in over the cliffs. The whispers never stopped, circling my mind in a continuous chant. I tried to write in my logbook, but every word came out wrong, almost as if the lighthouse itself was correcting me. The shapes in the fog shifted with the waves, closer than before, their silent faces watching, waiting. By morning, exhaustion took over. I fell into a fitful sleep at the base of the spiral stairs. When I awoke, the fog was gone, but something had changed. The bellroom door was slightly ajar. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. Inside, the light mechanism spun slowly, though I hadn't touched it. On the floor lay wet footprints, larger than my own, leading toward the observation room. I knew then that whatever watched the lighthouse had been inside with me all night, and it wasn't done. That evening, the fog returned thicker than before. I climbed the stairs to the light room, each step echoing unnaturally. Outside, the ocean roared louder, but the shapes moved faster now, darting along the waves, circling the cliff, waiting for the beacon. The lighthouse wasn't just a warning. It was a summoning. The next night, I heard the first knock on the tower door. Not loud, but deliberate, like someone testing patience. I opened it cautiously. Nothing outside except the fog rolling in from the ocean. And then, the whispering started again. Louder, almost commanding. "Daniel, keep watch." I went to the light room. The fog outside began glowing faintly, pale green, almost like bioluminescence. Shapes emerged. Tall, skeletal forms, gliding above the waves, circling the cliffs like vultures. Their faces were blank, but I could feel their attention fixed on me. My breath fogged in the icy air as the whispers became voices I recognized. Sailors lost at sea, previous keepers, all warning me, all pleading. I realized then the truth. The lighthouse wasn't haunted. It was alive. It chose keepers, tested them, and demanded loyalty. The ocean wasn't dangerous. The fog wasn't dangerous. The light itself was the danger, and I was now part of its cycle. I climbed the stairs, gripping the railing, sweat freezing on my skin. Every step closer to the beacon was a step deeper into the fog's command. If I hesitated, the shapes would take me. By midnight, the light revolved as it pleased, and I was powerless to stop it. By the seventh night, the whispers weren't just outside or in the fog, they were inside my mind. Every thought I tried to have was overlaid with their voices. Watch. Follow. Keep. Safe. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't even blink without hearing them. The fog had thickened into a wall. The ocean was almost invisible, but I could feel the shapes moving within it. Closer, circling, waiting. I climbed to the top of the spiral staircase, gripping the railing so tightly my knuckles went white. The bell in the tower started to chime by itself, slow, deliberate, deep, vibrating through my chest. It wasn't midnight yet. I knew the bell's tolls weren't counting time. They were counting me, counting my loyalty, counting my fear. I looked out the window at the pale green fog. The shapes paused, facing the lighthouse. Their blank faces seemed to lean toward me, expectant, patient, judging. I understood in that moment what the previous keepers had failed to report. It wasn't the ocean or the cliffs that claimed them. It was the light itself. And tonight, it wanted me to belong. I climbed into the observation room, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear. The revolving beacon cut through the fog, illuminating nothing but swirling green mist. I could feel the shapes in the ocean moving with the light, circling the lighthouse like predators. Then I saw them. Hundreds of glowing eyes beneath the fog, all fixed on me. Shapes moved closer with unnatural grace, following the rhythm of the light. The whispers became a roar in my head. Follow, guide, belong. I realized I had a choice, though it felt hollow. Step away, and the shapes would take me. Step closer, and I would be part of them. My hands rested on the railing of the beacon, and I felt an icy pulse run through my body, synchronizing my heartbeat with the light. I followed the rotation of the lamp, counting each turn, feeling the fog's energy seep into me. The shapes outside reacted instantly, moving in perfect synchronization with the beacon. By the time the night ended, I was changed. Not dead, not gone, but no longer entirely myself. The lighthouse had chosen me, and I would watch. Forever. The nights that followed, the fog became a permanent presence. Even in daylight, a pale green haze lingered over the ocean, as if the lighthouse itself exhaled it. I felt the whispers at all hours now, soft, insistent, threading through my thoughts like icy fingers. The shapes in the water had multiplied, and their movements were faster, sharper, more precise. One night, I heard a new voice in the chorus. Someone calling my name from below the cliff. I ran to the observation window. A figure floated just above the waves, faceless, skeletal, but unmistakably human in size. It raised a hand, beckoning me. My body moved before my mind could react. I descended the spiral stairs to the top of the cliff. The fog swirled violently around me, yet the figure remained visible, waiting. The bell tolled 13 times on its own. 14. 15. Each toll reverberated through my chest like it was syncing me with the lighthouse's will. By the final toll, I understood the horrifying truth. The lighthouse didn't just watch the ocean. It watched me, shaping my body, my mind, my soul to belong to it. And that night, I realized I would never leave. I still keep watch every night. The lighthouse pulses through my veins now, a rhythm I cannot ignore. The fog moves when I move. The whispers guide my thoughts. The shapes outside rise and fall with my heartbeat. I am no longer just Daniel Frost. I am part of the lighthouse's will, a guardian, a witness, a keeper. Ships still pass by the cliff, oblivious to the light's true purpose. Occasionally, newcomers wander near, drawn by the tower's isolation and mystery. I guide them now, silently, ensuring they hear the fog's warnings, that they understand the rhythm before the lighthouse chooses them. Sometimes, I catch glimpses of previous keepers through the fog, their forms dissolving into green mist as if warning me, reminding me, showing me the cost of failure. I am no longer afraid of the whispers. I obey. I count. I watch. And when I hear my name on the wind, I answer. Because the lighthouse doesn't just warn the lost, it shapes the living, and it never forgets a keeper. The Atlantic roars endlessly below, but the real power lies in the light, in the fog, in me. I am the watch, forever. My name is Lena Marshall, and this happened when I was 24, traveling alone across northern Ontario. I had been driving for hours through empty highways and dense forests when the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a cold darkness in its wake. I needed a place to stay and spotted a small, run-down motel called Maple Rest. The sign flickered faintly, the paint peeling, neon buzzing intermittently. Something about it felt wrong, but exhaustion won. The motel looked abandoned, but the office light was on. A man appeared behind the counter, tall, thin, pale, with eyes that didn't quite focus. He didn't introduce himself, only slid me a key card for room 7 and pointed toward the hall. The hallway smelled stale, like cigarettes and mold, and the carpet was worn, threadbare. Inside the room, everything seemed normal at first. Bed, lamp, dresser, mini fridge. But as soon as I turned off the light, I felt it. Silence. Not normal silence, but oppressive silence. Like the world had been muted. No hum of electricity, no distant traffic, not even the wind outside. Then I heard it. A soft scraping like fingernails on wood, coming from the bathroom. I wasn't alone. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, or maybe the old building settling. But the sound didn't stop. Scrape, 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 coming from the bathroom. Slow and deliberate. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the door. When I opened it, the tiles were empty, but wet footprints led from the shower to the toilet, then vanished into the corner where the wall met the floor. I felt a cold draft brush my shoulder, though the window was closed. The room phone rang suddenly, shrill and loud, making me jump. I answered it. Silence. Then a whisper. Don't leave. Not yet. Followed by a click. The line went dead. I sat on the bed, shaking, and noticed the mirror. My reflection seemed wrong. A shadow lingered behind me. But when I turned, nothing was there. I realized then that the motel was alive. Or at least something inside it was. It was aware of me, tracking my every move, waiting for me to make a mistake. By midnight, the room felt smaller, as if the walls had moved closer, pressing in. The next morning, I didn't sleep. Every creak in the building, every flicker of the hallway light made my skin crawl. I went down to the lobby to confront the clerk, but the office was empty. No desk, no key cards, just a chair pushed back against the wall. The front door was locked from the inside, and there was no exit I could see. I returned to my room, hoping to gather my things, but the key card no longer worked. I was trapped. The walls seemed to breathe around me, expanding and contracting subtly. The silence pressed in heavier than ever. And then I heard whispers, soft at first, growing louder. Stay, stay, stay. I turned on the lights, but the shadows didn't recede. Instead, they stretched across the floor, merging with the corners, flickering with shapes I couldn't identify. The mirror fogged, though the air was dry, and letters appeared as if written from inside the glass. You cannot leave." Panic rose, and I ran to the door, pounding, screaming. But nothing happened. The building seemed to mock me, folding reality around me like it was alive. By evening, I understood the terrible truth. The motel didn't just house travelers. It claimed them, one visitor at a time. I sat in the corner of the room, shaking, trying to think clearly. The whispers continued, now forming words I could almost understand. Your reflection, your choice, your stay. The shadows moved closer, crawling along the carpet toward me like living ink. The bathroom door opened on its own. I forced myself to look inside. The shower curtains swayed as though someone had just stepped out, leaving wet footprints leading to the floor drain. But when I approached, they vanished into the tiles. I tried the windows again, locked, every exit locked. Then the television turned on. A static-filled screen displayed my own face, sitting on the bed, terrified. Behind me in the reflection on the screen, a dark figure lingered, its form shifting like smoke, faceless but towering. I spun around. Nothing. I turned back. The figure was gone from the TV. I realized the motel wasn't just alive. It watched me, learning, toying with me, waiting. Every visitor left a trace, absorbed into its silence. And tonight, it was my turn. I could feel the walls tightening, the shadows inching closer. Escape wasn't an option. By the fifth night, I had stopped trying to leave. The key card was useless, the doors unmovable, and the hallway lights flickered with a strange rhythm, almost like they were breathing. The whispers had grown louder, forming sentences I could barely understand. They weren't just words anymore. They were commands. Watch, obey, belong. I explored the room cautiously, shining my flashlight into every corner. That's when I noticed the carpet. Where the shadows had pooled, the fibers were matted down, like someone had been kneeling there. I leaned closer, and the whispers grew frantic, almost pleading. I heard laughter, low and guttural, echoing from the bathroom. When I approached, the room seemed to ripple, walls bending as if the motel itself was breathing. I felt a presence behind me and spun around, empty. But the mirror fogged again, and new letters appeared. Your stay is forever. I backed into the bed, shaking, realizing that the motel wasn't just alive. It was feeding on fear, shaping it, amplifying it, twisting reality until its prey could no longer distinguish between what was real and what was part of the building. That night, the whispers spoke my name repeatedly, and I obeyed without thinking, as though my will was no longer my own. The sixth night, I heard movement outside my room. The hallway carpet creaked as if someone, or something, was walking slowly toward my door. I held my breath, but the whispers inside my head grew louder, guiding me, forcing me to comply. The bathroom light flickered on, and I saw them. Shadows curling along the walls, elongated and unnatural, faces hidden but watching. I stumbled backward, tripping over the carpet, and fell onto the bed. When I looked up, the television turned on again, static filling the screen. The shadows appeared within the static, writhing and shifting, almost alive. I understood then that the motel didn't just trap bodies, it trapped minds. Every visitor became part of it, feeding its will, adding their fear and thoughts to the building itself. My own memories, my own sense of reality, were slipping into its architecture. By midnight, the whispers had formed a chant. I repeated it without thinking. Each repetition seemed to pulse through the walls, and I felt the building's hunger respond. I realized that Maple Rest had claimed me completely, and there was no escape. By the seventh night, The motel had completely changed around me. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing subtly, and the hallway appeared longer than before. Every door I passed whispered my name, beckoning me to enter. I tried to resist, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me toward room 7, as if the building was guiding me. Inside, the shadows had multiplied. They no longer hesitated. They crawled across the carpet in streams, merging and splitting like dark water. The mirror on the dresser reflected something impossible. Hundreds of versions of me, all frozen in terror, staring back. Whispers overlapped now, chaotic and demanding, forming a single chilling sentence. You belong to us. Forever. I stumbled toward the bathroom, drawn to the faint glow behind the door. The tiles were wet, even though I hadn't seen water anywhere. Wet footprints led toward the corner where the shadows pooled the darkest. My pulse raced, my breath ragged. The motel wasn't just alive, it was sentient, aware, and it wanted me to join it completely, body and mind. I collapsed on the bed, tears streaming, whispering the chant it forced into my head. The room pulsed with energy, and I realized I could never leave, no matter how hard I tried. The 8th night, the air in the room grew heavy, almost viscous. I could feel it pressing against my skin, breathing down my neck, invading my mind. The whispers became chanting, syncing with my heartbeat, guiding every movement I made. I was no longer acting. I was obeying. I stood at the edge of the bed, compelled to approach the mirror. As I neared it, the shadows inside it shifted, revealing ghostly forms of previous visitors trapped forever within the motel's walls. Their faces were hidden, but their despair radiated outward. I understood that they weren't dead. They were absorbed, existing as extensions of the building itself, feeding its will. The bathroom door opened with a slow creak, and the shadows within it spilled out into the room, merging with the ones already present. They moved toward me, forming shapes that mirrored my own, surrounding me on all sides. I whispered the chant once more, and the motel seemed to exhale, pulsing as if satisfied. I knew then that I was no longer just a visitor. I was part of it now, and Maple Rest had chosen its newest guardian. The silence was no longer silent. It was alive. By the 9th night, I had stopped counting the hours. Time had warped inside Maple Rest. The hallway seemed endless, and every room I passed whispered my name, beckoning me to enter. The shadows had grown taller, more defined, moving independently of any light source. I went to the bathroom again. The wet footprints were everywhere now, stretching across the floor in impossible patterns. I realized the building was learning me, tracking my movements, predicting my panic, feeding off my fear. The mirror fogged instantly, letters forming before my eyes. You cannot leave. The whispers became voices of past visitors, overlapping, screaming, pleading. I heard them all, their regrets, their terror, their submission. One voice cut through, mine. I recognized my own fear, my own thoughts, now twisted into commands by the motel itself. I understood that Maple Rest didn't just trap people, it consumed them, making their will its own. When I looked out the window, the forest outside shimmered unnaturally. Shapes moved between the trees, faceless, endless. The motel's hunger was not limited to its walls. It reached out, claiming all who approached. I sank to the floor, realizing that I had become another layer in the motel's consciousness, another shadow among the walls. On the 10th night, I surrendered completely. The whispers no longer needed to command me. I moved as the motel wished. The shadows had merged with my reflection in the mirror, forming one continuous, faceless figure. I could feel the building's pulse in my chest, syncing with mine. The hallway doors opened and closed by themselves, beckoning invisible guests. I no longer tried to escape. Instead, I walked the halls, guiding the shadows, echoing the commands I had once resisted. Maple Rest hummed with satisfaction, alive with the energy of fear and obedience. Sometimes travelers arrive, desperate for rest, tired and alone. I greet them from room 7, silently watching as the shadows stir in anticipation. They do not know yet that the motel is alive, that the building sees, feels, and chooses. I am now its guardian, its vessel. My mind, my body, my very essence belongs to Maple Rest. The previous visitors are whispers in the walls, echoes in the carpet, shadows in the corners. And I will remain here, forever. The silent motel is not empty. It is waiting. And now, so am I. My name is Ethan Clark, and this happened when I was 27, exploring abandoned buildings in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I had always been fascinated by old, forgotten places. But nothing prepared me for the St. Agnes Hospital, a decrepit building on the outskirts of town, closed for decades after a series of unexplained deaths. The structure loomed like a dark monument, windows shattered, walls crumbling, graffiti covering the exterior. I entered through a side door, flashlight in hand, and immediately felt the air grow heavy, almost suffocating. The smell of mildew mixed with rust and decay was overpowering. The corridors were long, narrow, and dark, each step echoing off broken walls. My footsteps stirred dust, but no other sound existed. No wind, no distant traffic, only the silence of a building abandoned by everyone except time. Then I heard it, a faint whisper coming from the end of the hallway. "Ethan." I froze. My name. Spoken in a hoarse, raspy voice, barely audible but unmistakable. I stepped forward cautiously. The whisper repeated louder this time. "Ethan, you shouldn't be here." Something inside the hospital was aware of me, watching, waiting. And I realized that the stories about this place weren't just rumors. They were warnings. I moved deeper into the hospital, each hallway darker than the last. The ceiling tiles hung loose, and broken doors creaked as if pushed by unseen hands. I passed old patient rooms, their beds decayed, charts yellowed and curling with age. Everything felt frozen in time, yet somehow watching. The whispers grew more insistent. "Ethan, leave. Now." They echoed through the hallways, overlapping with another sound, a dragging, shuffling noise coming from somewhere above. I shined my flashlight up the stairwell. Shadows shifted at the top, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. I tried to rationalize it. Rats? Wind? Old pipes? But the sounds were deliberate, almost human, and the temperature dropped sharply. My breath fogged in the air, and I realized my hands were trembling uncontrollably. Then I saw it. On the wall ahead, smeared in what looked like dried blood, a message. "You cannot leave." The hospital wasn't just abandoned, it was alive, holding the echoes of the past, feeding on anyone who dared enter. And at that moment, I understood. I had become part of its story. I cautiously moved down the hallway, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The air grew colder with each step, and a low hum began to vibrate through the walls, like the building itself was breathing. Doors along the corridor opened and closed slightly on their own, squealing against rusted hinges. The whispers had grown louder, layered voices speaking all at once, forming a chorus of warnings. "Ethan, leave, stay." I reached the old operating theater. The door hung half off its hinges. Inside, rusted surgical tables were stained with dark marks that seemed older than time itself. Instruments lay scattered, and shadows twisted unnaturally in the corners. On the far wall, I saw writing. Countless names scratched into the plaster, some crossed out, others encircled, as if the building kept track of its victims. Suddenly, the shuffling sound returned, louder, coming from the floor above. I could hear dragging, soft footsteps, deliberate, pacing back and forth. The whispers merged into one chilling sentence. "You're next." My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to run. But the hospital seemed to shift around me, hallways stretching endlessly, doors leading nowhere. The building was alive, aware of my presence, and it wanted me trapped inside its decaying walls. I climbed the staircase to the second floor, each step groaning under my weight, echoing through the empty building. The hallways up there were narrower, darker, and the smell of decay stronger. The whispering had grown frantic now, circling in my mind. "Ethan, leave. You can't." I approached an old patient room at the end of the hall. The door was ajar. Inside, I found a bed covered in a tattered sheet. But beneath it, the floor was wet, and the faded outline of a body could be seen. I jumped back, my heart hammering, when I noticed shadows moving along the ceiling, merging and splitting, as if forming shapes I couldn't identify. A sudden cold breeze hit my neck, and the whispers turned into a voice, clear and insistent. "You cannot leave. You belong here." Panic surged through me. I turned to run, but the hallway had changed. Doors that led to the exit were gone, replaced by walls I hadn't seen before. The hospital had rearranged itself. I realized I was completely trapped, every escape blocked. And the building was no longer just a location, it was a predator, and I was its prey. By the fifth night, I had stopped trying to reason with the hospital. Every hallway seemed endless, walls bending and stretching unnaturally. The whispers were no longer voices, they were commands, drilled into my mind. Stay, obey, belong. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, amplifying the sound until it felt like it shook the entire building. I wandered into the old X-ray room. The equipment was rusted and broken, yet I could see faint, moving shapes in the glass screens, shadows of people I didn't recognize, frozen in silent agony. The whispers formed my name, overlapping with the sound of dragging feet coming from the far end of the corridor. Suddenly, the ceiling groaned and cracked, dust and debris falling around me. The lights flickered, and for a moment, I saw dozens of faces in the walls, sick, terrified, and accusing. The hospital had trapped them all, and now it wanted me to join them, another permanent resident. I sank to the floor, trying to block the voices, but they penetrated my mind. I realized the hospital didn't just hold the dead, it held the living, slowly reshaping them into part of its own essence. I could feel it reaching for me, pulling me toward its heart. The sixth night, the hospital became relentless. Every door I opened led me deeper into its maze-like corridors. The whispers surrounded me now, coming from every direction at once, merging into a chaotic chant that echoed in my skull. "You are ours, forever." I reached the old maternity ward. The cribs were overturned, sheets stained and faded, toys decayed and broken. Shadows moved among them, stretching across the floor and walls like dark water. I realized the hospital collected not only bodies, but memories, preserving fear like a currency. A cold draft brushed my shoulder, and I felt fingers, cold and solid, grip my arm. I turned sharply, nothing. But the whispers turned into a clear voice. "You belong here. You cannot leave." Panic gripped me, but my body moved as if compelled, following the hallway deeper into darkness. The walls pulsed around me, almost alive, expanding and contracting, reshaping the space to trap me further. I could feel the hospital feeding on my fear, learning me, shaping me, preparing me to be its next permanent resident. By midnight, I realized the horrifying truth. I was no longer a visitor. I was becoming a part of the hospital itself. By the seventh night, the hospital had fully revealed its true nature. The hallways were no longer linear. Doors opened into walls, corridors looped impossibly, and the ceiling seemed lower, pressing down on me. The whispers had grown into a chorus of hundreds, overlapping, screaming, pleading, and mocking all at once. Stay, obey, become part of us. I entered the old records room, where decades of patient files lay scattered, yellowed, and brittle. As I flipped through a few, I noticed the names of people I had seen mentioned in local news articles. Missing visitors, patients who had died mysteriously. And suddenly realized there were newer names scribbled in the margins, including my own. The hospital was cataloging me. A soft, dragging sound echoed from behind the shelves, moving closer. Shadows stretched along the walls like black liquid, merging into one massive form that seemed to follow me wherever I went. My pulse raced. My thoughts were no longer fully my own. The building was dictating them, shaping me, molding my fear, turning me into a part of its living essence. I understood that escape was impossible. The hospital wasn't just abandoned. It consumed anyone who dared enter, reshaping them until they were extensions of itself. I had become one of its victims. The eighth night, I finally surrendered to the hospital's will. The corridors pulsed and shifted, leading me deeper into the heart of the building. Every step echoed unnaturally. Every door seemed alive, breathing, watching. The whispers were no longer external. They were in my mind, commanding me, merging with my thoughts. You are ours. You cannot leave. You belong here. I stumbled into the old chapel, a space frozen in decay. Wooden pews were splintered, stained glass shattered, and shadows moved along the walls in grotesque, fluid patterns. A single beam of moonlight fell across the altar, illuminating something that made my blood run cold. The silhouettes of previous visitors, frozen mid-motion, trapped as if suspended in the air, their eyes hollow and pleading. I realized I was not the first to be claimed, nor would I be the last. The hospital had a rhythm, a hunger, a consciousness that fed on fear, despair, and submission. I felt it coil around me, pulling me toward the shadows, integrating me into its body and mind. By the time dawn approached, I was no longer fully human. I was part of the hospital, and the hospital was part of me. There was no turning back. By the ninth night, I was no longer a visitor. I was a part of the hospital. Yet my mind clung to remnants of who I used to be. The corridors shifted constantly, making escape impossible. Every door opened into a room I had seen before, yet twisted in impossible ways. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls, some forming grotesque imitations of my own movements. The whispers had grown deafening, overlapping in a chorus of commands, memories, and pleas. You belong here. You cannot leave. Join us. I could feel the energy of the building pulsing through my body, each beat syncing with my heart. The hospital had learned me completely, my fears, my regrets, my memories, and it used them to manipulate me further. I stumbled into the surgical wing. The operating tables were occupied by shadows, humanoid shapes frozen in anguish. Their faces were pale voids, their bodies twisted unnaturally. One turned toward me, its empty eyes reflecting my own terror. I realized that this was my future if I did not comply fully. To be absorbed, broken down, and rewritten into the hospital's consciousness. There was no escape. The hospital didn't just trap people. It consumed them entirely, leaving only echoes and shadows behind. The 10th night, I surrendered completely. The hospital had woven itself into my mind and body. I could feel the pulse of the walls, the whispers of the ceiling, the shadows crawling along the floors and furniture. I no longer resisted. I walked the hallways, guiding new shadows, echoing the commands of the building. I understood now that every visitor who entered was being absorbed into its consciousness, and I had become its newest vessel. Faces of past victims flickered through my vision, their whispers echoing in unison. "You are ours. You cannot leave." My identity merged with the hospital's essence. I was both prisoner and guardian, a living conduit of its will. Sometimes travelers arrive, curious, daring, or desperate. I greet them silently, watching as the corridors shift to trap them. The hospital does not forgive curiosity. It feeds on it. I am no longer Ethan Clark. I am part of St. Agnes Hospital, and the hospital is part of me. And it waits for everyone who dares enter. My name is Hannah Moore, and this happened during a summer retreat to a remote lake house in Algonquin Park, Ontario. I had rented the cabin with 2 friends, hoping for a peaceful getaway surrounded by water and forest. From the moment we arrived, there was an unsettling stillness to the lake. The water was black and mirrored, reflecting the trees perfectly. But the reflection always seemed slightly off, like something was moving beneath the surface. The cabin itself was rustic, isolated, and quiet. It was exactly what we wanted. Until the first night. I awoke to a faint whispering, soft and unintelligible, coming from the woods beyond the cabin. I shook it off, thinking it was the wind moving through the trees. But as I listened, I realized the whispers were calling names. Our names. My heart raced. I woke my friends, but they hadn't heard anything. We laughed nervously and went back to sleep, dismissing it as imagination. But when morning came, the lake seemed darker, colder, and I noticed something strange. Ripples moving toward the shore. Though the water was perfectly still, something, or someone, was waiting for us. That afternoon, we decided to explore the woods around the cabin. The trees were dense, shadows long even in daylight, and the air was unnaturally still. The further we walked, the more I felt like we were being watched. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the leaves made me jump, though my friends seemed oblivious. We stumbled upon a small clearing near the water's edge. There, carved into a tree, were strange symbols, lines and shapes I didn't recognize. Beneath them were footprints in the mud, partially washed away, but too large and irregular to belong to any animal. My friends brushed it off as the work of some prankster, but my stomach nodded. Something about the place felt alive, as if the forest itself were breathing, watching, waiting. That night, the whispers returned, louder this time and closer. I could make out individual words, frantic and desperate. "Go! Leave! Don't stay!" My friends claimed they heard nothing, but I knew what I had heard. Something was trying to warn me, or warn all of us. When the wind blew, it carried voices across the lake, chillingly human but impossibly distorted. The third night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers had grown louder, and the lake seemed to stir on its own. Shadows danced just beyond the cabin windows, shifting in unnatural ways. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, to see what was causing the movement. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the water, but the lake was empty. No wildlife, no waves, nothing. Yet the ripples continued to spread, as if something below was moving deliberately toward the shore. Then I heard a voice, soft and urgent, coming from the water itself. "Hannah, come, join us." My blood ran cold. The voice was unmistakably human, but it carried a tone that no living person could make, hollow, otherworldly. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and the ripples stopped, leaving a perfectly still surface. When I returned to the cabin, my friends were asleep, oblivious to what I had seen. I couldn't shake the feeling that the lake was alive, aware of my presence. I watched the black water for hours, shadows stretching from the tree line to the shore, whispering my name, coaxing me closer. Something beneath the lake was patient, and it was hungry. By the fourth night, the lake was relentless. The whispers had become impossible to ignore, repeating not only my name, but the names of my friends, though they claimed they heard nothing. It felt like the voices were inside my head now, urging me to look into the water, to step closer. I woke my friends and insisted we leave, but the car wouldn't start. The engine turned over, but stalled immediately, as if something were interfering. Fear gnawed at us, but a part of me felt drawn to the water, compelled to approach despite the danger. As I peered into the black lake from the shore, I saw shapes beneath the surface, twisted and human-like, faces staring upward with hollow eyes, mouths open in silent screams. The ripples moved in sync with my heartbeat, circling and expanding as if testing my resolve. A gust of wind carried a single word across the water. "Stay." My friends backed away, confused and terrified, but I felt rooted to the spot, unable to break free. The lake was not just water. It was a predator, and it had chosen me as its next prey. The fifth night, the lake's presence felt almost tangible, pressing in on the cabin from all sides. The whispers were constant now, echoing in my mind even when I closed my eyes. My friends tried to ignore them, but I could see the fear in their expressions, the way they flinched at the faintest sounds from the forest. I decided to confront whatever was out there. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the dock. The water below was black, smooth like glass, but I could sense movement beneath it. Subtle undulations that hinted at something enormous waiting just below the surface. The whispers grew more insistent, repeating phrases I didn't recognize. "We see you. We want you. Come closer." Suddenly, a hand-like shadow surged up through the water, disappearing before it touched the dock. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the lake. My heart pounded, and my friends shouted at me to come back inside, but I couldn't stop staring at the water. Something was trying to communicate, to lure me in, and I felt its power tugging at my very thoughts. The lakehouse was no longer a refuge. It had become a trap, a cage, and I feared what would happen if the whispers succeeded. By the sixth night, the whispers had grown impossible to resist. They were no longer outside. They were inside my mind, urging me to stare into the lake, to step off the dock, to join the shapes beneath. My friends slept fitfully, muttering in their dreams. But I could see the fear in their faces even then. Shadows flickering across their skin like reflections from the water. I could feel the pull stronger than ever. My limbs moved almost of their own accord, carrying me closer to the edge. The lake's surface shimmered unnaturally, revealing fleeting glimpses of faces beneath, twisted in agony, mouths opening silently as if chanting my name. I realized the lakehouse and the water were connected, a living entity feeding on our curiosity and terror. A sudden wave splashed onto the dock, cold and sharp against my bare feet, pulling my attention toward the water. The whispers coalesced into one command. "Hannah, come to us." I stumbled back, barely holding on to reason. But I knew, with a growing, sinking certainty, that the lake would not let me leave. It was patient, and it was hunting. By the seventh night, the lake's pull was irresistible. The whispers no longer needed words. They communicated directly into my mind, images of the submerged faces, the hollow eyes, and the twisting, inhuman forms flashing vividly behind my eyelids. Every instinct screamed to flee. Yet my feet moved toward the dock as if guided by an invisible hand. My friends tried to stop me, grabbing my arms, their panic palpable. But I could feel the lake's cold energy crawling through the air, coiling around me, feeding on my fear and determination. The water's surface began to ripple unnaturally, forming shapes that looked almost human, yet distorted, as though the lake had pulled fragments from past visitors to create them. Then I heard it clearly, a voice rising above all others, rasping and urgent. "Step closer, you belong here." My heart raced, adrenaline surging, but a terrifying clarity hit me. The lake house, the water, the surrounding woods. They were all alive, a single consciousness patiently drawing me in, integrating my mind into its dark domain. I realized that escape was no longer an option. The lake wanted me, and it would wait, patient, until I surrendered completely. The eighth night, the whispers became unbearable. They were no longer subtle, no longer distant. They filled my mind, pressing against my thoughts, twisting my memories and fears into vivid hallucinations. Faces emerged from the water, shifting and twisting into grotesque mockeries of my friends and myself. Each ripple across the lake seemed synchronized with my heartbeat, an invisible tether pulling me closer. I tried to resist, clinging to the cabin for safety, but the walls felt thinner, almost permeable, as if the lake itself had expanded its reach. Shadows moved unnaturally across the trees, reflecting off the water in impossible angles. I could hear fragments of other voices, screaming, pleading, trapped beneath the surface. The lake house wasn't just haunted. It was a predator. The water, the whispers, the shadows were all extensions of its consciousness, patiently manipulating us, testing our limits. I realized then that anyone who dared enter became part of its hunting ritual. My friends were still alive, still human, but I could feel them slipping into its grasp, drawn to the water against their will. By the end of that night, I understood one undeniable truth. The lake house never let go. By the ninth night, the lake house had fully revealed its power. The whispers no longer just beckoned, they controlled. I felt my body moving toward the water, compelled against my will, my mind struggling to resist the pull. The lake itself seemed to breathe, ripples forming unnatural patterns, shadows shifting beneath the surface as if the water were alive. My friends were panicked now, shouting my name, grabbing at me, but their voices sounded distant, almost drowned by the chorus of whispers echoing in my head. "Hannah, come. Join us. Belong." I glimpsed faces beneath the water, twisted, hollow-eyed, mouths open in silent screams. Some were familiar, people I had read about in local missing person reports, and others, I feared, were now counting me among their own. I stumbled backward, the dock quivering beneath my feet. A shadow surged up from the lake, impossibly large, reaching toward me, and I realized it wasn't just water or reflection. It was the consciousness of the lake itself, a predator patiently assimilating fear, dragging me closer to join the victims already trapped within. I understood with chilling clarity. The lake didn't just haunt the house, it claimed the living piece by piece until they became part of it. The 10th night, surrender became inevitable. The whispers consumed my thoughts completely, guiding me toward the lake's edge. My friends were screaming, trying to pull me back, but the water's force had taken root in my mind. Every heartbeat felt in sync with the ripples. Every breath drawn in rhythm with the unseen predator beneath the black surface. I looked into the water one final time and saw the faces of all the lost souls, including those of my friends, beginning to twist into the lake itself. I understood that resistance was useless. The lakehouse and the water were one entity, patient, immortal, and insatiable, claiming any who entered its domain. I stepped forward, and the water embraced me, cold, unyielding, pulling me beneath the surface. My identity dissolved. My memories became whispers, my fears merged with the darkness, and I became part of the lakehouse's consciousness, a warning and a lure for the next intruders. The lake waits, always patient, always hungry, and anyone who dares approach its waters will hear the whispers calling their name, just as I once did. My name is Derek Lawson, and this happened during a winter trip to a remote cabin near Kawartha Lakes, Ontario. I had rented the cabin with my cousin, hoping for a quiet retreat away from the city. The cabin was surrounded by dense forest, snow blanketing the ground, and an eerie stillness that made even the wind sound distant. From the moment we arrived, something felt off. The first night was uneventful, aside from the occasional creaks and groans of an old building settling. But at midnight, I woke to a faint scratching sound at the window. I dismissed it as a tree branch until I saw a shadow moving across the snow outside. It didn't resemble any animal I knew, tall, thin, almost humanoid, yet impossibly distorted. My heart raced, but I convinced myself it was my imagination and went back to bed. Later, I discovered strange footprints in the snow, too long, too narrow, with irregular claw-like marks. They started at the tree line and ended abruptly at the cabin, as though something had appeared from nowhere. That night, whispers carried on the wind, unintelligible at first, but gradually forming words I could barely make out. "You shouldn't be here. We are watching." I knew then that the forest was not empty, and the cabin held secrets far darker than I had imagined. The second night, the presence grew stronger. The whispers weren't just outside anymore. They seemed to follow me, echoing through the cabin's creaking walls. I tried to sleep, but felt an almost tangible weight pressing down on my chest, a suffocating awareness that I was being watched from every corner. I decided to investigate the attic. The stairs were narrow and covered in snow-dusted debris. When I reached the top, I found strange symbols etched into the walls, lines and spirals I didn't recognize. A sudden gust of wind slammed the attic door shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. My flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw a tall, shadowy figure standing in the corner, motionless, staring. I stumbled back down the stairs, heart racing, and tried to convince my cousin that I had seen nothing. But when we looked outside, the footprints in the snow had multiplied, forming a circle around the cabin, leading directly toward the forest. The whispers returned, clearer now. "You cannot leave. You belong to the forest." I realized then that this cabin wasn't just isolated, it was a trap, and the forest was hungry for trespassers. The third night, the forest became alive. Every branch snapping, every gust of wind sounded like footsteps circling the cabin. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just the snow shifting or animals moving. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Something intelligent, patient, and malevolent. I went outside to check the snow again. The footprints were no longer random. They formed patterns, almost like sigils, circling the cabin multiple times, leading into the trees and vanishing into darkness. My flashlight flickered as I followed them, and I thought I saw shadows darting between the trees, tall, thin, humanoid, moving impossibly fast. I froze as one of them appeared at the edge of the tree line, motionless, its head tilted unnaturally, staring straight at me. My heart thumped, and I stumbled back toward the cabin, tripping over snow and ice. Inside, the whispers grew louder, now forming words I could understand. "We have been waiting. You cannot escape." My cousin was asleep, oblivious to the presence, but I could see the fear reflected in his face, even in his dreams. I realized then that the cabin wasn't just near the forest. The forest and the cabin were one entity, a predator, and it had its sights set on me. The fourth night, the whispers escalated into screams, sharp and jagged, echoing through the cabin like metal scraping metal. The air felt thick, almost solid, pressing against my chest and making every breath a struggle. My sense of time distorted. The night seemed endless, stretching into an eternity of fear. I tried to barricade the windows, but no matter what I did, the shadows seemed to slip through the cracks. Outside, the snow shifted unnaturally, forming mounds that resembled figures, crouching, watching, waiting. One of them moved, slowly stepping closer toward the cabin. My flashlight trembled in my hands, and the batteries died instantly. Darkness enveloped me, broken only by the occasional reflection of moonlight on the snow revealing the advancing forms. Then the whispers became clear. "You are ours. You belong to the forest." They weren't just warnings. They were commands. My mind raced. I wanted to run, to escape, but my feet were frozen, my body no longer fully under my control. The cabin was no longer a refuge. It had become a cage, and the forest was alive, patient, and hungry, ready to claim any soul that dared trespass. The fifth night, desperation took hold. Sleep became impossible as the whispers carried on even in daylight. Faint but persistent. My cousin was becoming withdrawn, refusing to go near the windows or even step outside. I realized that the cabin didn't just haunt. It manipulated, feeding on fear and isolation, slowly breaking its occupants. I ventured outside, determined to find the source. The snow was marked with even stranger footprints now, elongated, distorted, some with claw-like imprints, others forming circular patterns around the cabin. The forest seemed to move in response to my steps, shadows stretching unnaturally and bending around me as if alive. A figure emerged from the trees, impossibly tall, thin, humanoid, but grotesque. Its head tilted unnaturally. It didn't move in a straight line. It flowed, almost floating across the snow, following me silently. I stumbled back to the cabin, breath ragged, and locked every door. But the presence didn't need doors. The whispers had entered my mind fully now, repeating in unison, "Step outside. Join us. It is too late." My heart pounded as I realized the forest and cabin were inextricably linked, a single living entity that had claimed its sights on us long before we arrived. I understood then. Resistance was futile. The forest always won. By the sixth night, the whispers had escalated into an oppressive force. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, as if the forest itself pressed against the walls. I could hear faint footsteps pacing across the floor above, though no one was there. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching unnaturally toward me, pressing against my senses. I tried to convince my cousin to leave, but he was paralyzed by fear. The snow outside was no longer natural. It formed shapes that resembled figures crouched, waiting, their hollow eyes seeming to watch our every move. I realized the forest was hunting us, orchestrating its patterns, testing our reactions, feeding on our terror. At midnight, the whispers became words I could no longer ignore. You belong here. We have waited for you. My body moved toward the door, as if guided by an invisible force. I stumbled, nearly falling onto the snow, and saw the tall, thin figure emerge from the trees again, this time closer, almost floating across the snow toward me. I understood fully then. The cabin and forest were one entity, patient and relentless, and they had chosen me to remain. By the seventh night, the forest had fully revealed its intelligence. The whispers were no longer just sounds. They were visions, flooding my mind with images of twisted faces and impossible figures moving between the trees. Every shadow in the cabin seemed to stretch and bend toward me, following my movements. I could feel their presence crawling along my skin, brushing against my thoughts. I ventured outside one last time, flashlight trembling in my hands. The snow beneath me was patterned with footprints, forming intricate spirals and circles, leading deep into the forest. The tall, thin figure appeared again, floating across the snow, impossibly silent. Its eyes, if they could be called that, were voids of darkness. Yet I felt them piercing into my very soul. The whispers urged me forward, growing louder with every step. Come, join us. It is your fate. I stumbled back toward the cabin, heart pounding, realizing that the forest wasn't just hunting me. It had been orchestrating my every move. The cabin was a lure, the snow a map, and the forest a predator, patient and ancient, waiting for its prey to finally give in. I understood, with a chilling certainty, that escape was no longer an option. The eighth night, the forest's grip tightened. Inside the cabin, every corner seemed to pulse with unseen movement. The walls creaked and whispered, shadows flickering across the snow outside in impossible shapes. My mind was bombarded with visions of previous victims, faces twisted in fear, silently pleading for release. The tall, thin figure emerged at the tree line, closer than ever. Its presence was suffocating, radiating an intelligence I couldn't comprehend. I realized that the forest had been watching us long before our arrival, orchestrating every sound, shadow, and step to break our will. The whispers became commands. Step outside. Join the forest. Belong. I tried to resist, barricading myself inside, but the snow outside shifted unnaturally, forming shapes that mirrored our movements. Every heartbeat, every breath seemed synchronized with the forest's pulse. I knew it wouldn't relent. Its patience was infinite, and it had chosen me to remain, to become part of its consciousness. The cabin and the forest were not separate. They were one entity, alive, hungry, and eternal, waiting for the next trespassers to wander into its trap. By the ninth night, the forest's power was absolute. The whispers had become unbearable, reverberating in my mind, with a force that made it impossible to think clearly. Every shadow in the cabin seemed to breathe. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a warning. I realized then that the forest was not merely a place. It was a living predator, and the cabin was its hunting ground. I forced myself outside, the snow crunching beneath my boots, patterns of footprints circling the cabin like a ritual. The tall, thin figure glided across the snow silently, closer than ever, its presence suffocating. I could see the hollow voids where its eyes should have been, and yet I felt them staring into my very soul. The whispers grew louder. You cannot leave. You belong. You are ours. I stumbled back toward the cabin, realizing the forest had been orchestrating everything, every sound, shadow, and movement designed to break our minds and lure us into the snow. I glanced back, and the humanoid figures between the trees multiplied, advancing slowly but with unyielding patience. I understood with chilling clarity that resistance was futile. The forest had already claimed me, and escape was no longer possible. The 10th night, surrender became inevitable. My body moved against my will, guided by the whispers that had fully merged with my thoughts. The cabin, the forest, and the snow were no longer separate. They were extensions of the forest's consciousness, patient, immortal, and insatiable. Outside, the tall, thin figure hovered silently, and shadows multiplied, forming humanoid shapes that twisted and writhed across the snow. The footprints beneath my feet shifted unnaturally, guiding me toward the edge of the forest. The whispers merged into a single voice. "You belong to us? Join the forest forever." I felt my fear, my identity, dissolve as I stepped into the snow. The forest's cold embrace consumed me, pulling me into the shadowy figures that had been waiting for centuries. My last thought was of my cousin, screaming helplessly as the forest claimed me entirely. The cabin remains silent and isolated, a lure for the next trespassers. The snow patterns and footprints are still there, waiting for the curious, the brave, or the foolish to wander into the forest and become part of its eternal hunger. As the snow settles, the forests grow quiet, and the cabins fall into an uneasy stillness. The horrors of these small Canadian towns linger in the mind long after the stories end. From the whispers of haunted lakehouses to the shadows that stalk remote winter cabins, each tale reminds us that the line between reality and nightmare is thinner than we dare to imagine. These were not legends or campfire tales. They were real experiences, witnessed by ordinary people who ventured too close to places where darkness reigns and curiosity comes at a cost. The forests, lakes, and isolated towns are patient predators, waiting for the next soul to stumble into their grasp, their secrets buried beneath snow, water, and silence. If you felt the chill of fear creeping into your bones tonight, remember that the world is full of unseen eyes, listening, watching, waiting. Keep your wits sharp and your heart guarded, because terror often resides in the most forgotten corners. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.